Greetings and salutations. My name is Tracy Stallings, and thank you for joining me this week as we discuss fake news and the sleeper effect in social media posts. The Case of Perception of Safety in the Workplace by Ruggieri et al. And published in 2022. Today we will cover the entire article, beginning with the abstract and introduction, going to methodology, summarizing the results, and then viewing the discussion and the conclusion. So let's start with the abstract and the introduction. So if you are on social media at all, then you know that fake news and misinformation thrive in the cyberland. Understanding these underlying mechanisms of memory is an important factor in developing the specific intervention programs in order to combat disinformation. Ruggieri and his partners had 324 white-collar workers view Facebook posts regarding COVID-19. These posts consisted of real news, fake news, and real news with a discounting cue of the sleeper effect. Participants were more susceptible to fake news during a 1-week delayed post-test following a memory recall process. They would remember the message, but not the source. So let's talk about this study further. Some scholars are referring to us now living in a post-truth era. Though fake news is not a new thing, it has been warped into a new era of fabricated claims specifically meant to be shared on social media platforms. The growth of social media and the ease that people can produce and share digital content are considered the primary reasons that this is happening. So, in the past decade of studies, researchers note that exposure to fake news influences people's perceptions, trust, and opinions that associate with delusions, religious fundamentalism, and reduced analytic thinking. Researchers have also concluded that there is a connection between online hate speech, populism, and fake news, and that there is a connection with cognitive and social processes making falsehoods believable. COVID-19 was ripe for the spread of this misinformation. This has created real-world issues like eroding trust and keeping people from vaccinations and prevention measures. The mere exposure, one time, to misinformation is a powerful force influencing a person's perspective. Researchers have focused on how memory processes themselves help to spread the fake news. You cannot just erase a memory from existence. Instead, retraction and debunking add to the memory, so it becomes more difficult in correcting fake news due to the dual processing perspective of memory retrieval. There is a dichotomy between the automatic memory processes, which include familiarity and strategic memory processes, such as recollection and output monitoring. Essentially, it takes more effort to remember not only information, but the debunking of that information. The strategic memory may not bring forth the entire information. And familiarity applies because the more you see something, the more familiar it is, even when it's dead wrong. But then the sleeper effect occurs when a delayed increase in a persuasive message's impact occurs when the discounting cue, example given in this case, non-credible source, becomes unavailable and disassociated from the communication in the memory. So it's suggested that the sleeper effect occurs because messages have forceful arguments, but lack of a good source ceases to matter over time. A person will just remember the message. If you read something intriguing and reasonable for your perspective, then you may forget later that you read it in an Onion instead of a reputable news source because it sounded really good and you liked it. So let's talk about the methodology. Of the 324 Italian participants, 29% had a college education, with the other 71% having a high school education. The university students at the university were asked to take home the questionnaires to white-collar worker acquaintances. The study was then conducted online from September to December of 2021. Participation was completely voluntary and there was no compensation. The participants were shown 6 Facebook posts. 3 were filler, with one of real news, one of real news with a discounting Q, and fake news. Of the 6 posts, the real one was a post with a strong argument by a credible source. The real news with a discounting Q was a strong argument by an untrustworthy source. And the fake news was disinformation presented as real news, with the presenter of the news being an activist of the anti-vax world. Each post had a similar number of words, similar likes, similar shares, and similar comments. And after each post was examined, a brief online questionnaire was given. 1 week later, they were presented with the same questionnaire and then an additional questionnaire regarding where the participants recalled of the post and their sources. Participants were ranked by the dependent variable of the credibility of their answer to the fake news post. They essentially were ranked as believers or non-believers of fake news. So let's go over the results. Regarding the real news and the real news with the discounting Q, both showed that the general impressions returned back to baseline condition. This was true for those that believed the fake news and those that didn't. But regarding the fake news, both groups of the believers and non-believers remembered the fake news post better than the other 2 posts. Let's discuss this and see what the conclusion was. The researchers showed in the cases of the real news posts, over time, the general impression converged to a baseline. But in both believers and non-believers of the fake news, that fake news memory was improved a week later. The researchers explained that the believers who had minimized the effects of COVID-19 had personally found a confirmation of that belief. But then the non-believers tended to memorize the post because it was different from the rest of the posts. So in both cases, that made this post more memorable than the standard real news. Other studies have shown that people tend to maintain misbeliefs and that it is difficult to forget them because fluency is often mistaken for truth. But in regards to the sources, there was no difference in the long-term retrieval of the post sources. Basically, it just was not that important. Recently, individuals have been bombarded with large amounts of information, true and false, about hot topics. A person's interest or anxiety can open them up to assimilating these false memories. For those interested in which posts were used for the questionnaire, you may pause here and read these. So in the introduction, we learned that fake news and misinformation are on the rise in social media in the past decade. The methodology was a within participant Likert scale questionnaire of educated white-collar workers who read multiple Facebook posts, including a real with discounted, and a fake news post, and then were tested on the memory retention over a week using that discounting Q of the lesser source. Fake news is pervasive and more easily recalled by both fake news believers and the non-believers, and memory mechanisms play a key role in how fake news works. These mechanisms should be explored on a physiological level and not just a psychological. Implications are that it will require multiple interventions in order to manage fake news and counteract the spread of this misinformation. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate you.